Alex Ansary here. It is August 27th in the year 2017. So I'm going to be discussing the human psychology that's being overlooked by people in our society when we look at these conflicts in the streets, along with some spiritual perspectives. Now, we just came out of a total solar eclipse. If you look at the effect on human consciousness when we go through these particular events and have solar flares, things of that nature, people get extra emotional. And then you look at the things that are taking place right now. What's really critical is that people understand that the idea of white supremacy being defeated by the actions of those on the left, it is a fallacy. The idea that they have claimed victory in San Francisco because they shut down a free speech rally. As an ex-Portlander that's well familiar with the intolerance of what's called the left, Antifa, being considered a conspiracy theorist to them as well. And that was difficult to go through those years, but the point is I can see through their ingenuine behaviors. And in general, if you look back, you really see a sea of white people fighting, and it's like something out of The Outsiders. Yes, there are some minorities there on the left and the right, but ultimately the left and the right are going to exclude those or ostracize minorities and whites that are actually independent thinkers. Guilt trip them, accuse them of being with the other side. Okay, if it's the left, accuse someone of being a Trump supporter. If it's a Trump supporter, accuse someone of being a closet Clinton supporter. Never saw this type of crazy psychology, schoolyard bullying type of behavior during previous elections. This whole thing was done as a massive psyops, as they also plan to take out the president, possibly. Something he is playing his role in. Intellectual discourse about these things, though, has evaporated from many of our lives. Those of us that are real independent thinkers, we find ourselves pushed into the underground. We find ourselves losing support from our audience because we refuse to pick a side. And those of us that are also not pushing a religious agenda find ourselves alienating those that have orthodox religious views that may be put off by discussions about meditation, spirituality, consciousness, karmic realities, things of that nature. It's unfortunate, but I know what that's like. So I have a life experience now, and a book that I'll write will detail much further than what I've put out on YouTube, and who knows when that will be published. But there's going to be a fair amount of psychological analysis, and what I see right now, I see a society that has many aspects. Assume that by this point it would have reached either a critical mass of consciousness, and then of course the apocalyptic visions, doom and gloom, the worst. And we really see like a lack of balance in even worldview as people have their hopes. And so when people talk about like a global shift in consciousness by a particular year, that's religious dogma. That's disinformation, and that is basically, if you're calling us a conscious society now, we're on the verge of it. What does that say then, a statement about all of the people that are being killed and hurt and victimized? And so there's a lot of people that have never healed from that type of New Age disinformation on the hardcore dark side of conspiracy theory. Human psychology, instinct, respond to threats, real or not. And so people have been responding to threats and fear. And there are people that have been very well compensated by Google AdSense by pushing disinformation, even though it was a trap to allow that much disinformation to pollute the internet and then crack the whip on genuine, small content creators on the left and right. So as we see this take place, as I see these people fighting, what I see is more of an ancient, tribal, human pastime. To go out in the streets and fight. This is not uncommon to the history of the world, the history of Europe, and the peasants fighting amongst each other as the king ruled over. Divide and conquer is not a new concept. Not a new concept. What's happening now, you would think, would educate people around the world to the blueprint. People could also study Afghanistan and the destabilization of that country, funding certain radicals while not funding the non-radicals who are also involved in fighting the Russians, for those that actually will read for 5 minutes the history, and not just from the CIA's perspective. So reality is what they've done to Middle Eastern countries seems to be a blueprint for the United States in some ways, truly, as they manufacture a domestic insurgency on both sides. Not a new concept for insurgencies to be manufactured, enemies to be created, and once those enemies are created, then the pretext to go to war and invade. Well, I want you to think about America's future. I want you to watch Fourth Horse Rising on my YouTube channel, the free documentary, about what I believe is coming between now and the 2020s, between the United States, China, and Russia. And it's more than likely that they're going to use the domestic unrest, back to human psychology, to build up this narrative that China and Russia should intervene, needs to intervene. I don't agree with that, but it seems like that's where it's going. Human psychology, human psychology. The whole world is now being programmed with a new form of psychology. The United States must be stopped. Look at these Americans fighting the street. Look at both sides. Look how ridiculous it is. This is America. Well, it doesn't represent all of us, but it certainly represents a growing number of Americans that are being influenced by left and right media, and yet they're unaware of the conspiracy. They're unaware of the media monopoly. They're unaware of the connections between the media and politicians on the left and the right. People keep playing up because human psychology, with its pleasure and pain centers, seems to gravitate to the pleasure centers wherever possible. Pleasure from being with a team. Pleasure for the idea of, even if they're lying to you, loving your leader, whether it's Obama or Trump, and then fighting someone else who's not. This is like human psychology. This is like the makeup of man. The divide and conquer plan playing on us now has been played on civilization since the dawn of time, since there's been rulers, since there's been influencers. And see, now we're in the age of internet propaganda that Nazi Germany didn't even have. 100 years ago, for example, 1898, you have a guy with a top hat, J.P. Morgan Chase type character. He'd have to campaign in New York City. Think about gangs in New York. And then you had those corrupt politicians, ho, 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 I'm going to help you. But see, he actually had to go to the print newspaper. And see, now with this media monopoly and what they're doing on the internet, there's so much more that they control than what people understand today. The human psychology today is so dumbed down. The pattern recognition, I keep coming back to this, seems to be fading away. There seems to be like, they say don't stare into the eclipse, you could go blind. It's like people going blind from staring too long into their laptops. Read articles about internet addiction. Read articles about internet addiction and depression. Read articles before even the fake news thing about Facebook modifying your feed, modifying what you see to mess with your emotions. And people saw that and went, oh my God, and just jumped over that detail and allowed their emotions to be manipulated by the feeds that were targeting them politically to get pumped up and fear this group and click on this. And ooh, this one lady shared this. This group from this country is planning to hurt Americans. And their friends are like, yeah, that's been debunked. That's totally Photoshop. She's like, well, it might as well be true. So she doesn't even care that it's fake. She doesn't even care that it's fake. Young Turks, check. Talks about a black guy being beat up in Charlottesville. I know it's a white supremacist rally. You watch the tapes, the black guy and his friends started it, knocked a guy out with a stick. Was Cenk just unaware of that? Did he choose to censor it? Or is he so in the narrative that he's not even noticing that? It was just a genuine accident. He's just not even looking for the facts. He's just running with some narrative, right, that the other end of the mainstream media and his cronies are going with. So you have disingenuous reporters in today's day and age. But see, they're going to stay in their pleasure centers in their brain. They're not going to be in pain if they can help it. You know what's painful? Being shunned and judged. Being an independent thinker. Being called names because you don't think like everybody else. So what do people do? Let me tell you how you become successful on YouTube. Okay. I'm not speaking from example. I don't have great audience support. I'm speaking with regards to observations of others. First of all, it really helps if the audience perceives the speaker as a fellow tribal member, not an outsider. It also helps if that speaker tells that audience what they want to hear. To kind of go with the flow of the narrative that's on the other main trending alternative, because about being kind of in a thought form bubble, going with the flow, not rocking the boat, not acting like you have an intuition and going, I feel that Trump's a deceiver. You have no evidence. You're paid by Soros. Oh, okay. Well, I know somebody's not intuitive if they're making assumptions that aren't true. But see, we're at a level now of human psychology where lying, fighting, and deceit, and making threats, and even women on the left and right, being okay with other women being targeted on the other political side. This seems to be something very barbaric in Middle Ages that people are kind of encouraging, with men and women fighting in the street. And the human psychology regarding Portland, Oregon, a place, again, a lot of its own problems with homelessness, problems with the local city. There are people that are angry there that could be organizing and discussing local issues. They're not doing that. And if they do, they're too busy calling the mayor of Portland a member of the Klan. Ha! Okay. He's called a snowflake liberal by the right, and then he's called a Nazi by Antifa. And he just hired a black police chief from Oakland. Oh, and that's going to be met with suspicion as well. It must be a trap. Everything is just... Where are the people? Where do we see the human psychology of people actually supporting charismatic, positive speakers? Maybe with a spiritual message. People that aren't co-opted. I'm not talking about the Green Party. I'm not talking about, well, what about Gary Johnson? I'm talking about like authentic grassroots people that haven't been hovering around the mainstream as like the counterfeit alternative to kind of zap votes and send them into a black hole. What about people outside the political system? What about people making food together? Oh my God, there I go. A potluck at the park. And I think on a deep, primitive level, some of those people don't just want to fight with each other. They like to know each other, maybe date each other, maybe have sex with each other, maybe not just fight. But on a primitive level, that's what comes first. You ever see dogs? Sometimes it's like their natural nature. Think about it and look at these humans. It's coming naturally to them. It's like the old days. These people come out in the forest, the tribes, one part of Europe and the other, and they've got their fire and they've got their arrows, and they're fighting internally. It's going to be really bloody. It's like there's something in our ancestry, right? Something evil, my spiritual take, is trying to bring that out. And we can see it in human psychology, that evil spirit. That's where we can see the evil and negativity and go beyond just human psychology, but see literal evil. An evil human psychology. But as spiritual beings, right? There's a spiritual, not just a physical. So you're dealing with evil-spirited human beings that are committing violent acts against others on both sides, plotting to commit acts and travel around the United States and cause disruptions. I believe that is in the forecast for this country. It's all going to be used against all the American people. That's what's so tragic about it. But the human psychology will be there as they continue to make pretty much a demon out of the United States by design, for other governments to intervene, for other economic systems to replace the dollar, so on and so forth. And it may seem good for a while, and I'm not defending the dollar or saying the U.S. is perfect. I'm saying it's been a deliberate destruction of our country that the left and the right cannot talk about together peacefully and debate. And on the topic though, right, I want to talk about this a little bit further, the fighting. You want to talk about cowards? You want to talk about cowards? See, I'm not a fan of the fighting that I'm seeing, but you know what would be like better and more professional? Because really, if it's going to go down like that, no weapons, one-on-one, and certain rules. Don't curb stop him once he's on the ground. No 2-on-1, no 3-on-1, just one-on-one with a referee. Okay, gloves, no gloves, bare knuckle it. You know, but I'm not really in support of that. But that makes more sense than just this wild mob of gang warfare. Maybe be sport, and then maybe after though your sportsman-like fight, you trade books, you eat. Oh, after a workout, maybe it's time to eat, and then you ramble and you talk about politics. Maybe share a beer, maybe share something else, maybe share a kiss. The sexual tensions are there in our society. And I know you're not getting this content from anyone. When you have a society where people haven't really had a good lay, that's not just about sex, but like cuddled with someone, held someone, some of us are pretty much forced to become more spiritual and to let go of our desires and attachments once we realize the matrix of human suffering through that. I'm not going to get deep into certain Buddhist concepts, but you know where I'm going with that, right? Suffering caused from extreme desire. We want to stay out of desire and fear and be a stronger human being. That's what I'm trying to do out here. No connection with any human beings, off the grid, living off 100 some odd month, trying to get support from the audience. I'm living very differently, folks, than anyone else in the independent media, which is why I'm asking you for your support. But a lot of different things I want to bring up. It's a lifestyle that I've adopted to, but I'm not going to take my anger out at my isolation and any minority group, women, or any men. Okay? It's about the issues. It's about the programming. It's not about any particular group. I see others though, right? They've been impacted by negative friendships, relationships with others. Sometimes it's a personality issue. Sometimes it's the programming. It could be a lot of things. We look at the case of Christopher Cantwell. He used his negative relationships with women and minorities and used that as his excuse to become a white supremacist, saying he went from libertarian to white supremacist. I've seen people attack me on my MGTOW videos. One person said, you know, I'm looking at you trying to figure out what side of your family that rat look comes from. And that comment was left a few days ago. How many of you get comments like that daily? Or weekly or monthly? So if there's a human psychology, right, that sees someone in pain, and here's someone's take pretty much on lack of relationships leading to aggression. And I would even count that for women. And our society is like involved in breaking up the family. So like this isn't on like the radar. And then men are under attack. If they're talking about men's rights, they're being labeled as evil, especially white men. And then it's difficult though, right, to explain to some white men there's also demonization going on of other men that isn't warranted. It's important that they see their own demonization. And it's important that they see demonization of innocent people around the world. And it's important that people at least keep an open mind, even if they're atheists, to the idea of karma, kind of what this country is creating for itself. Okay, we weren't at each other's throats like this a few years ago. People were acting like this is normal. And their human psychology, their intellect, isn't allowing themselves to see this as political gang warfare. This is not a civil war. These are unhinged people that are. This is Outsiders 2017. With women. So moving also to the next phase, I want to get into the human psychology of women that have chosen to get involved in violence on the Antifa side. You're dealing with a damaged human psychology when they don't have the foresight to realize that if they're going to do something and go after a male Trump supporter and attack him and smash his camera, that there's probably going to be an arrest, and it makes even less sense for that young girl in Portland, the redhead, to fight the police and kick the police. There's a certain level of just lack of foresight. And then I remember noting this and seeing certain women no longer appearing at those protests. Because what happened was, once their identity was out there, they were trolled with rape threats. And rape threats are becoming very popular in this country. While Antifa seems more violent in the streets, the rape threats and the white supremacy seems more dominant on the internet. Although there are situations that are happening, hate crimes and things of that. But the more extreme violence seems to be coming from Antifa, with the more extreme hate speech, insults, race baiting online coming from radical elements on the right. Their own human psychology, like that Antifa girl, dumbed down. As we look at the people that are going to social media, and they're announcing their new belief system, and they're declaring that they want to drive cars. There's a guy that just lost his job in Phoenix. He took to Facebook to say he wanted to go down to that rally in Arizona and drive his car, right, through a crowd of people. Human psychology. He's that dumbed down from either internet addiction, just like that Antifa girl, with no foresight to realize there could be consequences for your actions. The additional human psychology that needs to be addressed. Why so many police departments are standing down and allowing this, or getting political and looking the other way when on the in Charlottesville, on the white supremacist side, a guy fired a gun and they didn't do anything until it got out there on the internet. Then they didn't arrest. What, they think they're just going to get away with that? And then the human psychology people going, oh, that's normal. Yeah, they didn't hear anything. The whole crowd heard it. It was a gunshot. They didn't hear anything. The guy walked right behind the police line. So, for years, the human psychology on the internet hasn't even been accurate with where the dumbing down is coming from. People have blamed fluoride and certain things and vaccines, and while that's all true, a lot of us don't take those vaccines, and a lot of us don't live in areas where we drink fluoridated water. Portland's not one of those. So people make jokes about BPA. People make jokes about people looking feminized, about looking at the feminized men on the right, and they're completely overlooking the human psychology that overlaps those on the left and the right, and how they share the same thinking pattern, and in some cases racism. Because the left has a lot to answer for with regards to that. Pushing people out of their groups and circles that think differently than them. You see, the minorities that you see are the minorities of those groups. And they're only with those groups because they share a political ideology. Sure, you may see some minorities, some young girls or Muslim girls, maybe a Middle Eastern or East Indian girl, right, at an anti-Trump protest because of all the racial tensions and things of that nature. But you're not seeing her down there getting into fisticuffs. Certainly no woman with a hijab. Those are, for the most part, white Americans that are acting in an irresponsible way, that think that they, and more so now than ever, are going to get away with political violence as they bring their bats, as they bring their weapons. Human psychology. People are watching this on TV, and they're not realizing the media is showing them this is where the fight's going to be, right? Sometimes you're going to get away with it, though. Sometimes the police might intervene. It's like gambling. And then sometimes the police may not. Human psychology. How many of you grew up in the 60s or the 70s or the fighting 80s? People that are older than I. How many of you that are about the same age know that the previous generation was more of a martial arts boxing generation as far as people fought the streets? Now they're addicted to the UFC. They're addicted to watching it on TV. In the old days, fighting was a way of life. And there's the thrill of the hunt. I think about the the main boxing coach that I had, man of Japanese descent in Portland, Oregon. We're very different people, but this person did have a bloodlust for violence. Hours of war stories, taking on 15 gangbangers, being the only dude in the club, bouncing, knocking dudes out with a pair of knucks. I mean, he literally had a mind orgasm from the power. And think about Bolo Young from Bloodsport. He was a Japanese version of it. Most dangerous man that I've ever met. Certainly not the most dangerous in the world, but as a young person. But as I grew older, as a martial artist to a certain degree, self-trained, more of a spiritual path, my values and his really drifted. That's why I'm not a big fan of those that fight just for violence or to hurt people. There's a reason for that. So, learning about his story in certain periods, even before I learned about the solar cycles and civil unrest, I was picking up on the concept of humans, especially in certain areas, there being cycles where there's just straight up more fighting. And that means as much to those humans, when they're in that human psychological state, look at the solar flare influence over human behavior and aggression. And then you have a spiritual, human psychological overlap with that. And periods like where there's eclipses. So for a lot of people in their tribal, animalistic self, they're recreating what they've been doing in Europe for a long, long time. And they're fighting each other, right? And it's not really about race. It's not really about the politics. They're fighting each other because it comes naturally to them. That is their natural order. That is their natural way. And we see they, not all white people, because not all white people are doing that. Those white people, those white and minorities, and blacks, and whoever, that are going down to get in a fight that are on the left and the right. They are going with that tribal blueprint that exists. Literally, I've seen some people that are really obsessed with MMA and demons that have really played up the idea of the blood fight and the desire to fight no matter what, to constantly be fighting. And there's a lot of guys like that in MMA now, and in Portland. Like nothing to do with martial arts or spirituality, just like this one family, one race. Blood race. I remember this poster at Jungle Gym in Portland. And I knew exactly what he was getting at. Just that, fight no matter what race you are. Just fight, fight, fight. That's what they're into. That's the vibration that they're tapping into. And this is going to continue. And the actions of Antifa work against the interests of Americans. They work against the interests of minorities. Black Lives Matter, to a certain degree, works against the interests of the African American community, but not all Black Lives Matter activists behave in the same manner, although many do. We need to remember that we're being boxed in to these labels and to label each other. So even though these labels really do stick, right, the mass of consciousness, you need to remember that the possibility for individual thought does exist. There are human beings out there that are spiritually different, ethnically different, politically different, and in a good way. And I don't just mean ethnically in a good way, but I know that I just woke up into a generation to where my birth is considered white genocide to some people. And that is insulting me and all my information. And I know that in their human psychology, that's important for some reason to them. To not look at the things that we have in common, but to take some of the personal sharing as if we were friends, and then to twist that around and then attack because they know that person is sensitive in his feelings, but to attack and to feel like they're getting pleasure in their brain, human psychology, right, from hurting someone else. See, this is spiritual sickness. And you're really dealing with a collective body of mankind that hasn't even gotten close to its exorcism. Meanwhile, those of us that are outside those boxes are looking at things from the observer perspective. And I know what my role is. It's not to get involved and pick sides. It's to take the unpopular stance that's going to lose viewers. I'm going to discuss the human psychology over that and the spiritual sickness that is turning white American against white American, frankly, as well as other racial tensions mixed in. But people have really underplayed a manufactured white civil war, and they've really overplayed other racial tensions. They need to really look closely at what's happening and the movement, and listen with their heart. Feel with their heart what's going on, and step back. See, this is really, really critical. The future of America is frightening, and I'm not going to be afraid to say that. And I think that there's going to be a lot to analyze and discuss in the coming years as we look at this current phase of reality. With that, I thank you for watching.